Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Game of Thrones, Winter's Coming. Today we're taking a look at some things. You might have issues with understanding commanders, you might have issues in finding out how to know commanders or something like that. Today we're taking a look at Arya to kind of give you an idea of how to use her, what she's good at, what she's not good at, and why she isn't. And this is kind of going to be like a video series that I do on the commanders that are available and awakened, to kind of give you all an idea of where they're strong and how they can be used. So the idea behind this video, or at the end of this video, that you know how to use Arya basically. And you can see that she has also like certain guard skills and so on, and all those things we're going to take a look at later on in the video, but for now we are going to take a short look at the PvP setup and the Rebel Leader setup on her. So be right back. We are now in the training grounds, where you can see a random matchup that I have picked out here, and you can see that I've placed Arya in the back. And the main reason for that is that if you compare her defense, it's 5,500 to that of Chris. You can see that Chris has much higher defense, and the health is 28,000 compared to Chris's 75,000, which basically indicates already that Chris is more able to take hits than Arya is, and especially defense has a huge impact, because the lower defense it is, you have the higher damage to take. The main reason for why I've placed Arya exactly in this matchup behind Chris and in the middle back row is because, first of all, she deals increased damage to spears, and second of all, there's nothing that can really auto-target her aside from Sheila. But Sheila usually targets the enemy, I believe, that has the lowest damage or the lowest health to try and execute them, and in many of those cases Arya won't be that target, hopefully. And the main reason for why she's backline is also because of her skill, which deals, of course, critical damage, and then her passive guard skill, if you can say like that, which basically increases her attack if an enemy dies. So you basically want to put her in the back with someone in the front line that can tank up for her, where she's strong and kill off the enemy fast, because then she can start basically ripping through the enemy lineup. But that's kind of like the reasoning why I've placed her here. You preferably will, in PvP, always put her in one of the 3 back rows, depending on the matchup, if you're using her, of course. But let's take a look at the Rebel Leader setup right now then. The Rebel Leader setup is somewhat different than the training ground setup. The main thing is that there's only one specific target that you can attack, and also the fact that that specific target only uses skills once, whereas in training grounds they will use skills constantly if they can. Now you might be wondering why I have put Arya up in the front row here, and that's because the ones that are in the front rows are usually faster at the battlefield, and if we put her in the back row, then she will have basically lose 1 or 2 seconds of damage, because she has to walk from the back row all the way in front to actually deal damage. But if you put her in the front row, she basically gets with the first wave and starts attacking immediately. The main reason to why she can't be put in the middle is because then she will be the tank and has to take the hits from the Rebel Leader. And as we discussed during the training ground section, is that Arya is very defensively weak, strong offense, but we are really weak defense, which means that she will die if she's basically put to tank the Rebel Leader. So preferably you want to put a tank in the middle that can tank for her. It would be great if he has some kind of stun or something like that, which will take away some of the pressure from the tank that's there. Then you will basically have DPS on both sides of the tank, because they can go in without taking damage. You will preferably have some kind of support in the back of the tank that kind of supports the entire team. Most people will probably use Janne, because she has this AoE buff that basically boosts the attack while also having a passive heal. And then in the back you will preferably have some archers. If you're free to play, you might want to have Sheila and Sorin. Or Sabrina if you have her. I think it's Sabrina, her name is. And then basically you just try and mess around with your comp. Of course, if you don't have anyone that's good at taking down infantry, you can use her, though I would preferably say only use her against spears, since we have Mingo and Meryl for offensive, but we'll take a look at that once we get to those commanders. But basically this is kind of like a standard formation for Rebel leaders, which most people can use, and you can always change out Theon for Sorin if you're a free-to-play player. Unless you have Theon Grey, then he might debatably be as strong as Sorin. But again, that's up for another discussion. But this is kind of like trying to explain why you have Arya there and not somewhere else. You can also put it down here, of course. Both of those are fine, as long as he's in the first row, but doesn't have to tank. Let's go into a more detailed explanation to how good she is compared to others, at least. Now we're going more in depth to understand how Arya works and to understand her weaknesses and her strong points. We're going to take a look at training grounds, rebel leaders, and PvP. PvP, of course, in this case is direct usage of the commander when fighting in events or fighting during castle siege or stuff like that. Basically player versus player situations, KVK and so on. This is kind of like an outline of her skill sets. She has an active skill where she deals her attacks 3 times the target, dealing 4184 critical damage. This number, of course, is changing depending on the level, the amount of items she has, the rank, and so on and so on. So take it with a grain of salt. But basically, she deals 3 times damage with critical damage for 5 seconds. Then she has the passive guard skill I am nobody, where if an enemy dies, never mind, not dies, she reduces the defense of all enemies by 3311 for 10 seconds at the beginning of the battle, which is good in some cases and not as good in other cases, but that's how you can kind of like see it. Then she has the Arya's list, where she will get 3973 attack whenever an enemy is killed. This, of course, again varies depending on the rank and whatever item she has, but basically she gets an attack boost when an enemy is killed, and that's important to keep in mind. And then she has the 180 to crit, which is a nice little extra touch for offensive power. Her awakening skill, basically when she uses her awakening or active skill and targets the enemy lineup, she gets the death marker, and for every 1 death marker on the target lineup, Arya's target skill damage to that target increases by 20%, which means that the more death markers you can get, the more times you can use the active skill, the more damage you will do with the active skill, which is decent in some situations. And then, of course, there's an outline on how kind of her stats are at the current place that I have in. She has considerably high attack, lower defense, and lower health. So keep that in mind when we are going over the commander here, Arya. Now let's first take a look at the training ground section. I'm going to give her 4 out of 5 for free to and for free to play. I'm going to give her 5 out of 5. The main reason for why I give her these this judgment is because her passive ability is really good at breaking through enemy lines. If you can get that first kill on her, then she will start really hitting hard, and you just basically have to focus on setting up, as I showed you before, to try and get her that advantage so she can start running through enemies without being heavily targeted by the enemy lineup. She has also very high base attack, which we already saw, which means she deals tons of damage, but she's also very fragile and falls to AoE and single target damage if not supported correctly. And that's very important in training grounds because a lot of the training grounds commanders are using heavy AoE damage or very strong single target damage and stuns. And if you place her wrong, she will basically get melted before she can start eating through the enemy lineup. You also have to keep in mind that shields and stuff like that can really also kind of stop her in her tracks. So preferably if it's someone that just has high healing and you're able to get through, then there's a high chance that you can just basically start one-shotting commanders once you start getting the attack buff, because other commanders will start ganging up on the same commanders and so on. So keep that in mind when you're using her in training grounds. She is super fragile but very strong. And she's also a free-to-play commander, which means that she's fairly easy to get to gold and makes her a lot more devastating. And this is kind of the reasons why I say as a free-to-play it's 5 out of 5, because she's fairly useful, let's say like that. She just needs the correct setup around. And even if you're a free-to-play player, I would say that you can actually do decent damage and move around your commanders fairly decently. Like, they can contest pay-to-win commanders as well, as long as you set things up correctly and have a little bit of luck on your side, of course. And of course there are certain setups that are basically impossible to get through as a free-to-play player, but I would not say that it's completely impossible. I will give a 4 out of 5 for people that aren't free-to-play, because she's really strong, but there are other comps or other commanders that you can use that covers better what she does or goes in a completely different direction, whereas she is specialized in a certain type of comp and has to rely on having that damage advantage, or how to say, she has to basically face against a spear commander. If the enemy doesn't have any spear frontline commanders, then she becomes a lot more difficult to use, and then there are other commanders that are better in that kind of situation. Now for real leaders, as we saw before, for pay to win or low spenders or whatever you can call it, I give her 3 out of 5, and for free to play I give her 4 out of 5. Now you might wonder, why am I only giving her 4 out of 5 for free to play? Arya has high base damage and deals a lot of single target damage, as well as slight boost to critical hit chance built into her kit, and the crit chance is a bit odd in Game of Thrones. It sometimes procs and sometimes doesn't. You can't really see a certain percentage chance of it proccing. So you basically, people that have crit inside their upgrades have a more difficult time gauging in terms of base damage that they do to rebuild leaders, because sometimes they crit 3 times, sometimes they crit 5 times, and other times they don't crit at all. That makes the damage a bit inconsistent, which is also why she's really good, but it can be difficult to kind of gauge how good her damage is. One of her guard skills lowers the defense of the opponent during the first 10 seconds, which is especially good when all focus on target. And it's don't get me wrong, it's decent for PvP as well, or training grounds. But in most of those cases in training grounds, you will only get the 4-5 second usage out of it, whereas, and it's also spread out on all commanders, whereas in rebuild leaders you will basically get you will at least get 8 seconds, 7 or 8 seconds of usage out of it, and all will focus on that one specific target, which makes it a little bit more useful in that case. And this is mainly also something that's good to keep in mind when playing, for example, Weirwood Memories and stuff like that. But it only lasts for 10 seconds, which is a shame, but most cases, at least in training grounds, there are a lot of stuns, shields and so on, which you have to get through, and those things basically just render her ability next to useless. Also, she can tank rebuild leaders, so she needs frontline support, otherwise she will fall very easily. So never put her in the front middle position against rebuild leaders, and I also showed that before going into this, to kind of give you a visual idea of what it is I'm trying to do. She's basically just a super strong commander, just dealing high damage, and doesn't really offer up anything else aside from that 10-second defense debuff. Whereas there are other commanders that basically have that built into the active skill, where they debuff the enemy either in terms of attack, defense, or stuff like that. And I would say that I could say she's 4.5 maybe for free to play, but then again there are good archers for free to play still, and there are also some commanders, infantry commanders, that are decent. I know Barrett is decent, and they will probably also add more. So I would say 4 out of 5. You can use her in certain setups, but she's not something universal for Reaper leaders like some of the archer leaders or commanders are, that can basically be used for any Reaper leaders almost. And 3 out of 5 is of course for pay to win, because there are options that can be more devastating in her position. Can't remember what her name is, but there's an infantry commander that's stronger than Arya, I believe, in that section, and she also gets a damage boost and so on. So keep that in mind as well when you're doing things. Now we're taking a look at PvP. Give her for pay to win, I give her 3 out of 5. And for free to play, I give her 4.5 out of 5. She attacks us to total attack, which is one of the strongest buffs a commander can give. It's highly sought after by a lot of players in the community. Both pay to win and free to play are really liking total attack. She gives a bit inf health, but mostly inf defense, which isn't the greatest. The issue with this is that it forces you, if you actually want to have usage or get any gain out of this, you basically have to run a certain comp, and that's where she becomes a lot more difficult to use, because if you have her as a main lord, there's a high chance the enemy will just know, okay, you have infantry frontline, for example. So it's very one-sided, but yeah, she's elite tokens for Awakening, which is good, and also has 5-star combat rate Tarman, 6-star when Awakened enough, which is crucial for PvP. And combat rate is something most PvP players would want to get. So Awakening Arya and getting a high in Tarman and stuff like that is actually pretty useful, because this is kind of like a boost along her way to actually give these total attack and infantry upgrades in Awakening. Keep in mind that her base specialization is total attack and infantry defense. Infantry health is only included in the Awakening upgrades. I believe she has wood production increase as a third specialization buff, so keep that in mind. The infantry health is only for Awakening. Awakening skill can go on powerful tool, but requires a very specific setup that free to play people won't have access to. And the main reason why I say this is because her, as we saw earlier, her Awakening skill damage is based on how many times it procs and how many times it activates, which means that there is no free to play commander currently that amplifies that, but there is a pay to win commander that does that. I believe Layla does that, where there's a chance that the active skill can activate several times, which means that you can basically stack the active skill of Arya several times for Awakening, and then she will start doing more damage. And it's a niche setup, but it can be used. But that's kind of why I have taken her as 3 out of 5 for pay to win, and then for free to play 4.5 out of 5. 4.5 out of 5 for free to play is mainly because it's super difficult for free to play people to get total attack, and total attack is a must have in this game right now, and this is one way to get it basically. And I believe she is currently the only free to play commander that's awakened that has total access to total attack, so she's decent. If you're running with the infantry frontline anyways, she's really good. But pay to win, there are others that can do her job but do it better. She is fairly cheap in terms of elite tokens. Her Awakening skill is questionable, has niche situations, niche comps that you can use it to win. But there are again other setups that are better, or other commanders that are better, that can fill out her role better in certain situations. And that's just how it works right now. But overall, Arya is a decent commander, both for pay to win and free to play. Obviously, free to play will probably want her more than pay to win, because she has some pretty good usages and pretty good details regarding her. But this is kind of like to give you an idea of how Arya works and how she can be used. So I hope you like this guide. I hope you like the setup. I will do for another commander probably next week if I can, and I will try and make this something like weekly or every 2 weeks, depending on how much experience I have with the commander. And then I hope you will just like it, enjoy it, and watch it, of course. So yeah, subscribe to the channel if you're new, like and comment. If you want me to focus on a specific commander for next week, put it down in the comments down below. I'm always open to suggestions. If you want me to do a special guide or something like that, you can also write it down in the comments. If you feel like I did something wrong or said something that was wrong, you can also correct me. I'll gladly take a talk with you if you want, down in the comments. And yeah, the game link is in the comments, the Discord link is in the comments, and as well the link for the music that I'm using in this video. But I hope you now understand how Arya is being used, and that this kind of will help you in the game. So take care, have fun, good luck in the events, and bye bye.